Episode 15 with Scott Chesworth, Suman versus
where everybody that listened to it pulled off their headphones and went, ah! As soon as they heard it. Because it actually, for some reason, this one take, all the variables aligned, and it sounded like a dog was like running towards you really, really, really fast.
Oh, my dear listeners, I have a very special guest today on the show. He is Scott Chesworth from London. He is a renowned music producer, composer, and a brilliant audio engineer, and a great teacher as well. And I'm so glad to have Scott on my show today because I always follow him and I get lot of insight from this man, and I'm so privileged to host him. So welcome Scott to Suman versus Human. Namaste London.
Hey buddy, thanks for having me.
So Scott, today the music have evolved so much, the audio technology has evolved so much that most of the people do not have any idea about the complex audio terminology. Only a certain class of people know about those things. But people go and buy things, people go and buy expensive television, the people go and invest so much of money on home theater systems, audio gear or smartphones, which features all these complex audio technologies, for example, Dolby, or you can say spatial audio, stuff like that. So I want my listeners to know little bit more details about this in a simple language so that they get familiar with the technology, what they have in their hands and at their homes. So before we begin, Scott, of good olden days, those good golden olden days, we had vinyl. Then vinyl was around for a longer time. A vinyl was around for many decades. Then later audio cassette tapes came and vinyl disappeared. Then cassettes played a major role in music industry. It was around for so many years. Then it got disappeared. Then CDs came in. Compact disc was ruling the industry for so many years. Then the time have come where everything disappeared. No vinyl, no tapes, no CDs. Everything disappeared and music is all virtual. Now music, the audio became digital audio. Now I want to understand the basic difference between the vinyl, the cassette tape and the CD. We know there is a quality difference. What actually this quality about, Scott?
Well, two of them are analog formats and one of them is digital, right? So the CD, the compact disc, is a digital format. And so assuming your equipment is working, right, every CD that you burn is going to be a like-for-like copy. It's going to be identical. And there's really no restriction other than space, other than like the amount of information that you can burn to a CD. Whereas the analog formats have some inherent limitations. Like, for example, do you remember listening to a cassette tape and you'd hear like that hiss when you press play?
Yes.
And that would pretty much always be there. Like it's difficult to hear sometimes underneath when a song is playing, but it's still there, man. It's just that the song is louder than it.
Yeah.
But so for example, you could take some audio that's really, 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 really quiet, and you could burn that to a CD. And if there was no hiss in the audio in the first place, then when you press play on your CD player, there wouldn't be extra hiss, right? But on a
Yes.
cassette tape, you've got this concept called signal to noise ratio, which is like the signal is the bit that you want, and the noise is just the inherent noise of playing back the tape, like the
Yes.
hiss, right? And it's always kind of a trade-off between those things.
The noise is
Um,
like zzz, like something like that, right?
yeah, like a sort of like a hiss
Correct.
type sound, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not that there's a snake inside your boombox. It's just like inherent to the format. Um, and so with a CD, you could burn like really really quiet audio, and it would be fine. Whereas with cassettes, you were always kind of fighting a bit of a battle with the signal to noise ratio. And then vinyl has its own trade offs as well. When vinyl is cut, it cuts like grooves, really really small grooves into the vinyl disc, the record. And when you put the needle on the record, it stays in those grooves, right? And so the grooves are cut according to what the audio signal needs to do. And there are some things that you just cannot put on vinyl without changing the mix. So,
Mm.
for example, like wide stereo low end, like if you imagine like a synth bass, like a, I don't know, say from like an 80s song, and you've got like that kind of wide, like
Mm.
really prominent kind of synth bass sound, for example, that would be really difficult to put on vinyl. And what you often find nowadays, that vinyl is having a bit of a resurgence when people are burning new records to vinyl. You often find that the master is slightly different.
Mm.
So if you listen to like, if you know, buy the downloaded version of an album, or you stream a version of an album, if you get it on vinyl, they will sound different.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, each of those two analog formats has a sound to them. Like CD doesn't. CD is digital, so you know whatever you burn plays back, sounds the same. Okay, it's really simple. But cassettes and vinyl, the two analog formats there, they have a distinctive sound about them, and it's different in each case. A lot of people like the sound of vinyl. Technically, it's a narrower frequency spectrum. It doesn't go down as low and it doesn't go up as high. But a lot of people have kind of come to recognize that sound and enjoy it. Cassettes also have a bit of a sound to them. Can't say I like it very much, but and I don't know anyone that does. I don't think I know anybody that collects cassettes because they sound good. It's more of a nostalgia thing.
Mm.
So yeah, there's a few differences between those three formats. It is interesting to me that CDs aren't having any sort of resurgence like the analog formats seem to. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's what's coming next or whatever. But like, I'm not seeing. I'm seeing like vinyl shops appearing in London. I'm seeing cassette shops appearing in London. I'm not seeing any CD shops reopening.
Correct. Correct. Yes. Very true. I want to know, apart from the noise and apart from the distortion, is there is any marginal or noticeable difference in the quality of sound when I compare the sound between the vinyl cassettes and the CDs?
I don't think so, man. I mean, it. So with vinyl, technically, it is a narrower band of frequency spectrum. Like it doesn't go down as low and it doesn't go up as high in terms of the frequencies that you can reproduce on vinyl. Cassette, I don't know. I've never really studied up on cassette, really. I've just sort of heard it and gone, ooh, I don't like that. And so generally, if I don't like the sound of something, I don't spend a lot of time learning about it. So I don't know about cassette. Vinyl, yeah, technically it's a narrower frequency spectrum that you can
So low
reproduce, but
low
it's still enough.
low
It's still
frequencies like
enough to sound good.
basses and drums are not accurate on vinyl, right?
Well, so the stuff that we can hear is accurate. It's like sub frequencies
Yeah.
that you can't really reproduce as well on vinyl. So that it's more like the type of low frequencies that you feel, right? So
Yes.
just for listeners, we're talking about the frequency spectrum here, which is essentially breaking sound down into numbers. And so you've got like low frequencies, which is things like your bass guitar, your kick drum, like boom, boom, boom type
Yeah.
stuff, or like the subby kind of an explosion, for example, is like low frequencies. And then you've got your high frequencies, which is, stuff like hats or percussion.
Cymbals.
Yeah, cymbals, that sort of stuff, that sort of thing,
Yes.
or like kind of the if you listen to like a synth sound, it might have like a little resonance filter that kind of goes up high, like that starts up as high frequencies.
Yes.
And so what we're saying with vinyl is that technically there's low frequency that you can kind of hear, like you kind of hear the notes of a bass guitar, for example, but then there's also this thing called sub frequencies, which are frequencies that you feel more than hear, because it's so low. It's difficult to kind of associate a pitch with that frequency, but the sound waves down that low are so powerful that you can actually feel the air move. Like if you stand in front of a speaker at a concert, for example, and the drummer hits a big kick drum, like you can really feel that punching you in the chest, right? That's the stuff down low that you can't really reproduce with vinyl. And similarly, if we go up high, the stuff that we can hear, sure, it's all there on vinyl. But the frequencies above that are very, very, very quiet, usually in a musical mix, but they are there. Technically, vinyl doesn't go as high as CD, and so vinyl often ends up sounding a little bit darker. Because those high frequencies, those extreme high frequencies, you don't really notice the difference unless you take them away, or at least I don't find I notice them until they're not there, and then I start to miss them a little bit. But for whatever reason, people have decided that slightly darker sound is a thing they enjoy. And it's music, man. It's art. Like you can't really put any rules on. You're not enjoying art correctly. You know what I mean? It's like
Yes.
how you consume art is up to you. So if you like the sound of vinyl, knock yourself out.
People know about high resolution images. People know about high resolution videos. People know about high resolution photographs. So, but
Yep.
actually, what is high resolution audio about?
Oh, it's just the same concept, really, as all the rest of them. You're just reproducing more detail. Now, the important thing is that the detail has got to be there in the source media. And when we say the source, we mean like the original recording of the audio. So if I record some audio at like a really low, if I record some really low quality audio here, and then I just encode that as a high res format, and nothing happens. I mean, the file size gets bigger, sure, because I've encoded to a high res format, but it doesn't magically make my audio better. The quality has got to be there at the recording stage for high res audio to be any use to anybody.
To experience the high resolution audio, the source material, the actual recording has to be recorded in high resolution, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you can't upscale. And that's the same with video as well. Like if you record, if we take a format that people are more familiar with, like video, if you record at like, I don't know, 240p and then save as 4K, all that happens is you've got a really big file that's still 240p.
Yes.
You can't just like magically upscale stuff with video, and it's the same with audio.
Unless the content is encoded in high resolution format, there is no point of paying for a high resolution subscription.
Yeah, but if you're talking about like things like Tidal and that kind of stuff that offer like a higher res streaming service,
Yes.
then they do have masters at those resolutions. They do have the sources. They've licensed the like the higher quality source media to be able to do that. So things like Tidal are legit. They're, you know, it's totally valid what they're doing. I would argue that I can't reliably hear the difference, man, between like what Spotify are doing and what Tidal are doing. I think, yeah, technically there is a difference on paper. Technically, Tidal's high res stuff is you know is higher resolution audio. My question is, how much does that actually matter? And to me, as a listener, it doesn't really matter. The lower res stuff is good enough for me to enjoy music. And so if that's cheaper, I'm probably going to go with that as the subscription.
Correct. And I also heard that high resolution audio is not just about buying a subscription. You also need the equipment, the speakers, the earphones.
Ideally, yeah. Yeah, ideally. So the way this works is every piece of digital audio gear has converters in it, right? And so you need a what we call a DAC, a DAC, to be in the path somewhere. So digital to analog converter is what DAC stands for.
Yes.
And so what we find on a lot of playback devices is that they don't actually support the high resolution of high res audio. They'll just downscale it to something that they can support. So if you want like a really pure high res audio experience, listening experience, then yeah, you probably want to look into your equipment and make sure that everything that's in the signal path can actually support the resolution that you're asking it to do. Now that's getting better. Like decent digital to audio converters are getting cheaper as time goes on. Those chips are getting cheaper to manufacture, and more off-the-shelf audio equipment is starting to support the high-res formats. So it's just a progress thing, man. You know, in 10 years' time, probably most stuff will be high-res, probably.
My next question to you is, Scott, there are wired earphones and wireless earphones. Often
Yeah.
it's only about comfort, or there is also any quality difference when it comes to audio.
So, technically there is usually, unless you've paid big money to avoid this, technically there is usually some sound trade-off with wireless audio. Bluetooth in particular, until the last couple of generations of Bluetooth, Bluetooth audio over Bluetooth sounded pretty bad. As in, I'm not that fussy about audio, really. I know a little bit about it, but I'm not that fussy about what I listen to. And up until the most recent few generations, Bluetooth audio sounded pretty bad to me.
Yes.
Now, again, you've kind of got to consider what is the source media. So, for example, if I'm just listening to podcasts, like if I'm listening to podcasts where people are doing interviews, for example, and it's just spoken word, and maybe one side of that interview is like a phone line quality anyway, then sending that over wireless, probably doesn't matter. I can understand what people are saying, and I've got the convenience of wireless, being able to move around and not being tied to the computer or tied to whatever I'm listening on with the wire, and so that's fine. But then compare that to listening to like my favorite album ever, right? And I'm settling in for a night where I'm just going to chill out, listen to music, and lose myself in the music. I probably don't want to do that over dodgy quality audio. That's probably a situation where I do want to use the best playback system that I've got, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it's not always true that wireless sounds worse. There are headphones on the market now where even if there is a tiny bit of trade-off,
But they're more
it's absolutely
expensive, right?
acceptable. To get really good wireless audio tends to cost a fair bit, yeah. And I mean, you can find this stuff out just by looking at the specs, and I guess compare those audio specs to something that isn't wireless that's also good quality, and you'll see the difference in the numbers. But again, much like with the streaming model, we are at a point now where this stuff is getting cheaper to manufacture. Fidelity is getting better over time. And so we're at a point now where even the cheapest wireless stuff, yeah, technically there are some trade-offs, but if it sounds okay to you, it sounds okay to you. If you can
Yes.
still enjoy whatever you want to listen to on it fully, then there's nothing wrong with you listening like that.
But when we look at the budget headphones or earphones, then always wired gives you good quality. That is what I believe.
Generally, yeah, yeah, a little bit better, yeah.
Now, the other question I have is, Scott. Now, we know equalization as an audio producer or a audio engineer. We know stuff like audio spectrum frequencies and stuff like that, and we
Yep.
use uh, equalizers. But when you look at normal consumer who is buying audio equipment, and this audio equipment certainly will have an equalizer built in, and
Mm.
I have seen so many people, they don't even know what actually is 50 hertz, 60 hertz, 1 kilohertz, 4 kilohertz, but they still tweet it. So in a very simple language, what actually is equalization, and do a normal person who is not familiar with audio and music should use it?
Okay. So let's answer the last part of the question first. Should someone who isn't like a music producer or an audio expert use equalization? Absolutely. If they want to, they should experiment with it. Sure, feel free. Hopefully we can give you some answers here that will kind of guide that experimentation. So equalization is just frequency specific volumes, right? And so if we think of a volume control, like a volume knob, that just makes the audio louder or softer as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Whereas an EQ can do that with individual frequency bands. So, for example, if we take, just as a really basic example, if we take what we call a 3-band EQ, Um, Typically, that will be split into bass, mids, and high frequency, right? So low, middle, and high. And so if we go back to the example that I gave earlier, so your low frequencies are like boom, 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 like bass, kick, that sort of stuff. Your mid frequencies are like bright, high. Your high frequencies are like bright, high sounds, like the higher register notes of a piano, like hi-hats, stuff like that. Anything that sounds kind of delicate and bright is going to be high frequency, and the mid frequencies are everything in between. Now that's a pretty big area
Like
of sound to
human
cover.
voice.
So the human voice has a little bit of low, and then a lot of mid frequency, and a tiny bit of high. Like if you were to take a recording of us, of a human speaking, and take out all of the low end with an equalizer, you'd still be able to understand what they were saying. They wouldn't feel as present, as close to you, but you'd still be able to understand what they were saying. And similarly, if you were to take out all of the high end as well of in a recording of somebody speaking, again, you'd still be able to understand what they were saying. Like
Yeah.
it would sound different, sure, but the majority of the noises that we make are in the mid frequencies, when we're speaking and when we're singing. So an equalizer, all it does is it lets you shape frequency specific volume, right? And so if your speakers are lacking a bit of bass, for example, and you think like, the bass line on this song is wicked, I wish my speakers will reproduce it a little bit better. You could just boost some bass frequencies with the equalizer, and you'd just be increasing the volume of those bass frequencies, and everything else would stay the same. Or in your car, for example, you might say, well, when I'm driving, like, and I'm on the highway, I don't know what you call like busy roads in India. You might say like, yeah, I mean, when I've got the windows open and that sort of stuff, I kind of feel like I'm not really hearing like the high end of this song anymore. Maybe I need to make my EQ a little bit brighter. And you could just boost some high frequencies and then go for a drive and test it out. And again, it's frequency specific volumes, right? So you've just increased the volume of the higher frequencies, and everything else is still as it was. So basically, EQ is just a way of like shaping sound, and controlling what you want to be more and less present with those volume controls.
You engineers spend hours, days, and also months to shape the sound of a music, because equalization takes a lot of time. And after doing all those stuff and mastering stuff, now when the songs comes out, now this listener who have no knowledge about music, if he messes up with the equalizer and stuff like that, the actual originality of the song is lost, right?
Uh, kind of, but also remember what I said earlier, man. This is art, and how you enjoy art is that's specific to you, and that's your decision. So, I can spend a week mixing a song here sometimes, and I can agonize over that and get it as good as I can possibly get it, according to the way that I want to hear it, right?
Yeah.
And then it goes back to the artist that I'm mixing for, and sometimes changes get made according to how they want to hear it. And ultimately that's their decision, not mine, because I'm just a facilitator. It's their artistic output. So ultimately they have final decision about what goes out. Now, if you as the listener receive that, really all we can say at that point is we've tried. we've tried to make it as good as we can, right? The artist has tried to write the best song they can. If I've mixed it, I've tried really hard to put that in its best light. But if there's something about it that you want to hear differently, and an EQ, a little EQ move will make that possible, and you prefer listening to the song that way, whether it's because, I don't know, maybe the mix was a bit dark for you, maybe you'd prefer it to be brighter, or maybe, I don't know, the amount of low end we're pushing just doesn't sound great on your speakers. Maybe you want to listen to it really loud, and the amount of low end we're pushing makes your speakers distort. But if you take some of that low end out, you can crank it up and enjoy it at the volume that you want to without your speakers distorting. Whatever the situation is, ultimately now you're in charge as the listener. Like, we've done our part, we've made it as good as we can, as we can make it. And how you then listen to it and what you enjoy listening to, that's up to you.
For a rough idea, what frequencies fall under high and what frequencies fall under mid and low?
Okay. So this is a question where if you put 10 engineers in a room and ask them that question, you'll get 12 different answers. But if we talk really broadly, so your low frequencies in hertz are like anything below, I would say, 200, 250 hertz. Everything below that is what I would call low frequency. Above that, so sort of 250 coming up, 300, 400, 450, 500, probably low mids. And then 500 up to maybe like 2000 hertz or 2K, we typically call that. I'd say that's kind of mids. Sort of 2K up to about 4K is what I would call high mids, like the higher end of the mid range. But we're not getting into like brightness yet. And then above that, we start to get into the high end. So, you know, like 4K up to probably about 6 or 7K
7K.
is like what I would call high end. And then above that, I tend to call that frequency spread above that just air. Because it just feels, if you push a little bit more of that stuff above sort of 6, 7K, technically it's still high end, sure, but it does something a bit different. It's, you know, right up the top of that frequency spectrum. It's not stuff that you can really hear, but it feels different.
We know mono because all sound coming through one speaker. That is what I understand it as in mono audio. Then I know stereo right and left. Then I also know multi-channel like 5.1,
Yep.
7.1. But now, what is binaural audio?
Binaural is essentially trying to replicate the experience of hearing stuff with your ears as closely as we can. And so the microphones, when you're recording binaural, the microphones will be positioned where your ears would be. And then a more expensive binaural setup will often have like some sort of dummy skull. So the microphones will actually be embedded into a structure that resembles the human skull. And really what we're trying to capture when we record binaural is something that actually sounds like you're there listening to it. Now, it's incredibly difficult to get right. There's a lot of moving variables in that equation. I have had a couple of experiences here, a couple of listening experiences with binaural audio over the years that have just freaked me out, man. Like, there was one time I was listening to a binaural recording of a guy walking down a street, and then he stopped at a crossing and he pressed a button on the lights at the
Mm.
crossing, right? And the binaural perception of that sound of him pressing the button was so accurate that I felt cold metal on my fingertip.
Oh,
It freaked me out. It was like a physical hallucination. Like
wow.
I didn't expect it at all. I was just listening to the audio and it was like, oh yeah, this is a good capture. Yeah, wow, the street's really vivid. I can really tell where other people that he's walking past are, and there's music coming out of that shop. I kind of feel like I'm there with him, kind of. It was good. It was a good capture. And then there was just this one moment where he pressed that button and something extra happened, and my brain, just for a split second, my brain believed that I was there doing it, I guess. And I felt the sensation of that button just out of nowhere, and it properly freaked me out. My One of my ex flatmates, we used to live in a an apartment that had like a really long, narrow hallway, right? And my my ex flatmate had borrowed some binaural gear, and he recorded his dog running towards him down this hallway. And we tried a bunch of takes. We recorded that a bunch of times, and yet for some reason there was this one time that we recorded it where everybody that listened to it uh, pulled off their headphones and went as soon as they heard it. Because it actually, for some reason, this one take, all the variables aligned, and it sounded like a dog was like running towards you really, really, really fast.
Oh, wow.
And it was just this one recording of it was just more visceral. I don't know what was different, but it everyone that we played it to, their brains like connected with that one recording, and they just went and like it's like a scary experience when audio gets all of a sudden gets like more connected than you're used to it being.
So binaural is only recording technique. Like I don't need to have any specialized equipment to listen to binaural audio.
Just headphones. It's really difficult to get the binaural experience on playback on speakers. And I'm not even sure it's possible, man. If it's possible, I don't know how to do it. So just headphones to
And
listen to binaural stuff. They don't even have to be great headphones, really. But yeah, headphones.
why it is not so popular? Like why binaural is not used in commercial songs or music?
Because it's hard to record. It's hard to record it well, and also it's kind of restrictive playback wise. Like no one wants to sell mass media that you can only listen to on headphones. You know,
Mm, yeah.
like people when they're selling music, they want you to be able to listen to that music anywhere.
Spatial audio and binaural, are they both same, Scott?
Very similar, close cousins, yeah. And the stuff that I've heard just doesn't really interest me. Like
Or
I'm
or
I'm
it's just a proprietary technique to make money?
I mean Atmos is proprietary as hell. Yeah. Like that's licensed up to the gills. But it is cool if that's how you like to hear audio. I've heard a bunch of musical Atmos stuff at exhibitions and that kind of stuff. And to me, it's interesting, I guess. But it didn't I haven't heard any Atmos mixes yet where I get that visceral, oh, this changes everything. I want to hear these songs mixed like
Correct,
this now.
correct. True, true,
Yeah.
very true.
Like I don't go through a list of my favorite songs in my head and go, whoa, what would that sound like as Atmos? I hear it and I go, oh, that's interesting. Hmm. But I don't get any huge urge to hear it again. You know what I mean? Um, and so yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can do some cool stuff with spatial audio. I think for me, I enjoy that stuff more in like films and games and that kind of stuff. Things that are like more immersive environments. Um, I think my music taste in terms of production and how I want to hear music.
Scott, now audio engineers are dealing with three major things. That is, one is recording, two is mixing, and three it is mastering. We want to know what is recording, what is mixing, and what is mastering.
I'd say there are four. I'd say there's production as well.
Yeah, true.
Maybe
True.
there's five. Editing. Okay.
Now it is
So,
becoming more complex.
yeah, welcome to the world of an engineer. Um, so recording is like getting the artist in a place and recording what they've written, recording the song. So recording them singing, recording them playing instruments, maybe recording some other people playing instruments as well. And it used to be the case that like an engineer, a very serious person, did that recording. Now, as time has gone on and the barrier to entry has gotten lower and technology has gotten cheaper, now a lot of artists record themselves and they don't have a dedicated engineer. Where more people do still outsource is the editing, the mixing, and the mastering side of it. So actually, let's cover production while we're on recording. So production is just making choices while you're doing that recording. And so maybe those choices could be like, well, I've recorded these 5 parts and I thought the next instrument that goes down was going to be this sound, but actually I'm not entirely happy with that. Let me experiment with some other sounds and see what I can find. Yeah, I want this sound to be like, I don't know, darker. This sound sounds too bright. Let me go through my sounds and see what I've got that's darker, that's going to sit better with the stuff that I've already recorded. They're production choices that you're making.
Hmm.
And then production choices can also be musical as well, not just audio related. So you might be recording something and you might say, okay, well, we get to this double chorus, like a point where the chorus goes around twice. And by the end of it, I'm feeling a little bit bored. So what happens if this third line, what if we just rewrite that on the fly and just get the singer to do, let's find something different. Again, it's a production choice. And so a lot of the time now, artists are kind of inherently their own producers. Again, used to be the case that you had like a guy standing at the back of the studio and like instructing people what to do musically. But now artists have kind of taken on that stuff for themselves a lot of the time. And I think that's great because it means that the artist can have more autonomy. They've got like more control over their artistic vision, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when all that's done, when the recording and the production's done, then we move into editing, and that's just kind of tidying up. Because what you find a lot of the time is that when you're recording and when you're making production decisions, you want to be thinking creatively when you're doing that. You want to be in that kind of creative headspace where you're experimenting and, you know, trying everything to see
I have a
what
question.
combination of
Sorry,
stuff
I'm
works better.
interrupting you here.
Yeah, go on.
Production job, I think it's very complex, right? Because don't you have ego clashes with composer?
Yeah, so man, if I could do any job in the world, this job doesn't really exist anymore. But if I could do any job in the world, I would be a full-time producer. That would be all I would do. I love it. And to me, the ego clashes and that kind of stuff are like so interesting. They're never the same twice with 2 different artists. Never ever the same. And I love the psychology of being involved in somebody else's creative process and helping them shape that and bring it to light and be like the strongest it could be and exploring all the directions and encouraging them when they need encouragement and like bolstering their sense of confidence when they need that and pulling them back when they're going off in a direction that I don't think is going to be great for them. I really enjoy all that stuff. I love it. And that's just talking about producing a solo artist. Imagine doing that with a band and you've got 5 egos in the room. And then imagine how much more complex that gets.
Yes.
And man, the psychology of music production, I absolutely thrive on it. I love it. But yeah, if you're an external producer and you're producing somebody else, then yeah, the job is very
difficult.
wide remit. Like you're part facilitator, part psychologist, part musical overseer, part director. You're a lot of different things depending on what's needed that day
Yes.
or that hour. Which is why I love it. It keeps things interesting. But now, like I said, now a lot of artists are kind of inherently their own producers. And so, there was a time when I was a bit sad about that because it kind of decreased the amount of work I could get as a producer. But then also, it made the stuff that I was getting to mix and master more interesting.
Mm.
Because if I'm the producer on, 10 different records, all of those records are going to have elements of my taste in them. There is going to be things that I do over and over again with slight differences, right? Because that's how I like music. Whereas now I feel like with most artists being their own producers, if I get 10 records to mix where the artist has produced, the breadth of the art is wider. Because you've got artists producing stuff now who aren't really trained producers. They haven't put, hundreds of thousands of hours in exploring and studying analytically and whatever. They've just got this thing that they want to get out and get done, and they want it to be a certain way, and they'll do anything to make it as close to that as what they're picturing in their brain, to make it as close to that as possible, right? And so it does make for more interesting art, I think, with artists producing themselves and them ultimately being more responsible for their own artistic output. So yeah, back to editing. So editing is just tidying up after the recording, really. Like when you're recording and you're producing, you tend to kind of be a bit untidy because it's more like creative sort of headspace stuff. And so editing is like pulling all the best bits together and getting rid of stuff that you're not going to use. So then we move on to mixing, and mixing is just painting that recording in its strongest light, right? So you're making sure that all the instrument sounds work together cohesively. You might use some EQ. We talked about EQ. You're probably going to use quite a bit of that along the way. You're deciding.
Piano is recorded separately, flute is recorded separately, guitars are recorded separately.
Typically, yeah. And so when you're mixing, you're deciding like how loud things should be or how quiet things should be, where they should be placed in the stereo field from left to right when people are listening to this stuff. Yeah, you're just kind of like piecing together the recording and shaping things to get them to work cohesively, basically. Typically, the artist nowadays has quite a bit of involvement with the mixing. But at that point, they're more like directing a mixer. Like if the artist has sent the song out to someone to mix it, then the mixer at that point is like the facilitator, the button pusher, the person that like is operating the software. And we get, quite a lot of free license, I would say, to change stuff and shape stuff and whatever. But then each subsequent mix goes back to the artist and they send us what's called revisions or mix notes, essentially just requests for tweaks and changes. So there might be things like, yeah, I don't really like that change you've done. Take that away. Just go back to the original. Or it might be, oh, I love how you've done that. Can I hear more of it? Just give me a bit more. Or, yeah, like what you've done with that, but I feel like it's overriding this part. So can you just rebalance those? There's typically like a back and forward sort of process between mixer and artist, because you've essentially got two like listener perspectives there, and you've got to kind of find the thing that's right for everybody. But ultimately, the artist depends on the mixer, I guess, depends on the person mixing. But for me, the artist has the final say because it's their song, it's not my song. I'm working for them, right? Okay, so the mix is done. Then it goes off to mastering. And mastering is typically an external source, an external person. Not always, but still pretty common that mastering is an external thing. And even if you're a self-producing artist, right? You record yourself, you produce yourself, you mix your songs. It's still quite commonplace for you to send out for an external mastering engineer. And the mastering engineer is like the final check and also the final bit of gentle shaping. So most mastering engineers have got either a playback system that is very, very high quality and a listening environment that's very well treated and that kind of stuff. That's your more traditional mastering engineer role. Nowadays, you don't necessarily have to have that, but you do have to have like a very consistent playback system that's good enough that you know extremely well. Like, I would say for you to be a good mastering engineer that's valuable to other people, you can do it on, just a couple of sets of headphones, really, but you've really got to know those headphones, man. Like I've spent what must be thousands of hours here just analytically listening and taking notes on the couple of specific sets of headphones that I use here. And if you ask me to master a song wearing a different set of headphones that I don't know, I can't do it. I can do some guesses for you, sure, but I can't confidently send that back to you on any other set of headphones and say, yeah, this is a good master. It's done. It's ready. Release it. I can't do that. It's not genuine, right? I've got to, as the mastering engineer, you've got to know your playback environment extremely well because you're the last check, right? Beyond you, beyond the master, nothing happens. It goes out to the listeners. And so what we do when we're mastering stuff is we listen on ideally a couple of systems that we're really familiar with, and we reference a lot of the time. So we'll take like a similar-ish production. So maybe an artist in the same genre, a mix that is kind of broadly similar, or a music arrangement that's broadly similar. And we reference, we just compare the thing we've been sent to that finished article. And the idea isn't to copy or clone, really. It's just to check that we're in the ballpark. We're in a similar-ish kind of ballpark. Because, in genres, listeners expect to hear music a certain way. And so if, I don't know, let's say I was mastering some drum and bass, for example. If I didn't reference a bunch of other drum and bass stuff, and earlier that day I've been mastering some acoustic folk, I might not get the low end right? I might accidentally put a drum and bass tune out into the world, master it and say, yep, that's good to go, because there's loads of bass compared to that acoustic folk thing that I've just spent an hour listening to. But if I don't recalibrate my ears and my expectations by listening to a bunch of other good drum and bass that's been released, there might not be nearly enough for that genre. Yeah. So part of the referencing thing is just recalibrating ourselves as the mastering engineer, recalibrating our ears, refamiliarizing ourselves with what is expected in that genre.
Scott, you are a blind person, and
Yep.
it surprises me that a blind person is doing so much in the music industry and audio engineering stuff. I'm really proud of you, and team Suman versus Human salutes you. Scott, we want to know slightly about your journey into blindness.
So I can't tell you that much about it, man, because I don't remember it. I was born fully sighted. And I lost my sight when I was 13 months old, so just over a year. And I don't remember that far back. So I don't remember becoming blind at all. I don't remember seeing. And so this is all I've ever known, really, which I think has, in a lot of ways, has made it easier because I don't know anything else. And because I don't, it's tricky. Because I don't remember seeing, I've kind of got no frame of reference for that. And so for me, I've never really lamented the fact that I can't see because I don't remember it. I don't know what I'm missing. There's also, like, my eye condition probably isn't going to be curable or fixable or whatever word you want to use. Like the amount of sight that I've got probably isn't going to change in my lifetime, right? And so there's no point in, to me, there's no point in being sad about that. Like it probably isn't going to happen. Okay, cool. I'll assume it isn't going to happen and I'll get on with life. And then if it does, of course, a bonus. It's interesting. It's something to explore. But I mean, honestly, if a doctor was to call me tomorrow and say, "Hey, we've got this new technique, and we reckon we can probably get your sight back," and the odds of the operation being successful are like 90 something percent. When can you come in? I'd have stuff I want to get done first. Like it's not that urgent.
Not that urgent, but you want to get it done, right?
Sure, like I'd try it. I would be interested in it. There's a bunch of stuff that I would like to.
But
Yeah, I mean it. But the thing is, imagine, like, if I was to get my sight back, right? That means a good year of downtime just to learn to function as a sighted person, right?
yeah, that's true.
And I'll do it because after that, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that becomes easier. I can do more things probably.
Scott, you said you were never sad about your blindness, but I'm pretty sure that you might have you might have got a lot of frustration because of your blindness, because of inaccessibility of so many things in the world, right?
Yeah, but I mean, frustration is different than sadness. For me, frustration is, in a way, a motivator, right? And so I do a lot of advocacy for accessibility of musical tools here. And it's because I'm frustrated that they're not accessible that drives me to do that. The tool that we both use to record stuff is called Reaper. It's a workstation. And I've been working with the developers of Reaper since, like, I don't know, 2008, 2009 now, and really built a pretty good relationship with those people. In part because they take accessibility seriously. They understand that it's really important for blind people to have independence, and so that's what has kind of kept me with Reaper and stopped me looking at other options. I don't need to. I've got everything I need here. I can advocate productively, and I'm taken seriously when I write to these people. And so that's really all I need. Things like Asara, which is another thing that we both use, is kind of an accessibility extension for Reaper. Kind of like a browser plugin, if you like, but for a piece of music software. I fundraised to get that developed initially, basically because it needed to be done. It was born out of frustration that the previous accessibility extension was essentially abandonware at that point, and so we needed a new one. So yeah, there's there's loads of times when I'm frustrated, but for me, I think the trick that it's not even really a trick, but the thing that I've done consistently over the years is I spend a little bit of time being pissed off, and then I flip it to, okay, now what can I do about it? So for me, frustration is a motivator.
Now, the number of blind musicians is not small. We are a good number of people who are using musical instruments, audio equipments, and gear, and we pay the same price for the product, but the value we get is very little. So, don't you feel that there is a lot of injustice happening?
Yes, sort of. Wow, this is tricky. Sort of. But I also feel like there's ways that we can rebalance that. So, for example, if you're a blind producer, mixer, whatever, and you're only using third party plugins, like if you're only using really expensive third party plugins, um because they're, lauded as like being the option for professionals or the best or whatever, and a bunch of those plugins aren't particularly accessible and you've still paid full price for them, but you don't know how to use any of the stock plugins that come with the DAW. You've just assumed that they're not great and written them off and splurged for the higher quality stuff, the higher priced third party stuff. I don't have a ton of sympathy, man, because the stock stuff is right there. It's in front of you and it's great and it's fully accessible in most cases. And you haven't learned to use that. You haven't tried that before you've spent money. And so that's a choice you made. Like, yeah, technically it's an injustice, I suppose, but that's not the injustice I'm trying to fix. I don't know, man. There are definitely tools here where definitely plugins and instruments and stuff here that I've bought where I've paid full price and I can't use a lot of the feature set. And yeah, that bothers me. That, again, that's a frustration that is a motivator. I will always write to the developer of that plugin or those
How
instruments.
likely they are open to listen to your ideas to make the product accessible?
Actually, quite likely, but we'll come on to that in a second. Let me just finish what I was saying. Um, but the situations like that are fairly rare for me because normally I can find a different tool that's either cheaper and just does the things that I need it to do and not all the extras that I can't use anyway. Or I can find like an open source thing that does it, or whatever. And so it does add some time and complexity to the research process, I suppose, and it adds kind of it bothers me that we've got like a narrower scope of stuff to choose from. Our options are limited. That bothers me a lot. Um, but the situations here where I feel like I've paid over the odds for stuff that I can't really use are fairly rare, man, because most of the time, if that's the situation, I just don't buy it. I keep looking until I can find something where I do feel like I'm paying a fair price for what I can do. So to answer the question, how likely is it that developers will be receptive? Actually, pretty likely that they're happy to have a conversation about it. The tricky part comes when it's very common to encounter a situation where you've got a user that wants to be able to use a product and a developer that wants to make it accessible, but the logistics of doing that are impractical or, in a lot of cases, impossible. A lot of instruments and plugins are built on a framework called Juice. And up until a few versions ago, up until maybe, I don't know, year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, Juice didn't expose any sort of accessibility on any operating system. And so if a developer had built their entire product on Juice, there was nothing they could do to make it accessible without rewriting the product from the ground up, which is in some cases a tremendous amount of work. Now Juice has come forward with an accessibility API, and that's been evolving over time and getting better. And so now the majority of plugins and instruments that are being built on Juice, which is a lot of them. It's like probably the most widely adopted framework for building those kind of tools. They can be made accessible, and we're starting to see that now. Developers are, going to conferences each year, exhibitions, whatever, and at most of those events, there is some form of accessibility talk happening. There's quite often like an accessibility area in the event where some accessible products are on display, and developers are talking to other developers about accessibility. There's a place on the Juice forum to talk about it. And we are starting to see more products built on Juice becoming more accessible. And so, that's just one framework out of many. I appreciate there's a long way to go still. But I'm very active in like open source kind of circles, and I can think of like 3 other frameworks at this point who have noticed what Juice are doing and are now going, okay, we need to find funding for development hours to do that, because that's really important. So it's a time thing, man. On one hand, I want to say it's a waiting game, but the dangerous thing about saying that is that if everybody just waits, it doesn't move. So, for people that do want to advocate for this stuff, it's a busy time. For everybody else, not so much. It's still a bit of a waiting game for them. But stuff is improving. Accessibility is improving over time. It's a steady trickle of improvement at this point. And I would say now, like right now, is as accessible as I've ever known digital music making to be. And I've been doing it for like 20 odd years. I can't remember a time when it was more accessible than it is now.
Things are becoming better day by day when it comes to music and audio, and your
Yep.
contribution is big. And I say in a word, in a line, in a sentence, that you became a face of blind musicians, and my heartfelt thanks to you, because it is only because of you today many plugins, or for that matter music instruments manufacturers, coming forward to make their products accessible. And Scott, you are running a community called RWP, Reapers Without Peepers, and
Yeah.
I am very happy to be a member of that beautiful group. And my dear listeners, Scott is training a massive number of blind musicians all across the world, and his contribution to the community is just amazing. So, Scott, please give us some information about RWP.
Yeah. So I just want to say something else first. It's not that I'm the only person advocating for this stuff and making change happen. I'm someone that does. I do a lot of it. Sure. Most days here, I'm knocking on some developer's door, or I'm receiving some software to test and I'm giving feedback on it to another developer or whatever. Like it's a very regular occurrence here, but there are certainly other people out there doing similar work, and some of the really big kind of steps forward in accessibility I haven't even touched. So there's definitely other people out there doing this stuff. I think the reason that people tend to assume that I'm one of the main people doing it is I make the most amount of noise about it. Like I'm very open about what I'm working on, and I'm fairly quick to make noise when I don't have a good experience with a developer and that kind of stuff. So yeah, like transparency and openness are 2 really big things here. And so I think you hear more about the effort that I'm making than perhaps some people that prefer to do it, more quietly. Anyway, so RWP, Reapers Without Peepers, is an email group on groups.io. And it's for people that use Reaper with screen readers, screen reader software. So Reapers without peepers, i.e., like without peepers, as in like no visual equipment, right? So it's just for blind and visually impaired folks, really, that want to use Reaper. It's been going since 2010, 2011, maybe. And it actually wasn't me that started it. I was using Reaper by that point. And I wanted to create a group for people, and I snoozed on it for a few weeks and couldn't come up with a name that I was happy with. And I was like, well, I don't want to create the group until I found the name. And then a guy called Jason Smith started Reapers Without Peepers, and I saw it and was like, oh, damn it, that's the name I was looking for. That's great. So I just
Wow.
joined Jason's group, man, and started helping out. And then at some point, Jason drifted off, doesn't really use Reaper anymore. So I just kind of inherited the group. And that's that's been a way. That's been the way with a lot of the Reaper community stuff. So I didn't start. Reaper Access on WhatsApp is very popular as well. There's 400-500 people in there.
Scott, running a community, training staff, and you need some funds to do all these things. So, do you welcome donations?
I do. So some of the stuff that I'm doing at the moment is sponsored on the front end anyway. So like there's a series that I'm doing called Reaper Made Easy. So that's me and my buddy Jenny Kay over in Canada. And so we do 2 sessions each month. We do middle of the month. We do a deep dive on a topic. So that might be us teaching it, or it might be somebody that we bring in. So like tomorrow, for example, we're bringing in a guy who's really good at audio restoration, and that's the mid-month topic for this one.
Right.
So those sessions are typically a couple of hours long, and we go really deep. Like a lot of the time we do like a getting started with type session first, and we start from ground zero, and then we follow up a few months later with a more advanced thing. And the idea is you can kind of be there with us and ask questions and that kind of stuff. But we record those sessions as well, and then we edit them down and make them nicer to listen to. So it's a live learning experience, and then also every one of those mid-month session goes up and becomes like a static piece of training that, even if you can't make it along to live sessions, is free resources that you can learn from. So that session and the other session that I do with Reaper Made Easy is a open Q&A session at the end of each month, last Saturday of each month, and anybody that wants to can send us questions, can show up and chat to us live again for a couple of hours, and we take questions on anything around Reaper, accessible production. Like it's a fairly wide remit. Both of those sessions are sponsored up front. Like I've got funding in place where we're both paid to be there, paid to work on it. We still accept donations to that project because the sponsor pot isn't infinite. At some point, our funding's going to run out. But right now, we've got a fair bit of runway. But yeah, if anybody wants to donate to those projects, we basically, whenever you donate on the next session, we give you a shout out and thank you as part of the recording.
So, my dear listeners, I'm placing the donation link in the description. Give it a serious thought, and whatever you're donating, whatever the little thing you're donating, is going to sponsor a beautiful, helpful, informative, and lots of resourceful session to blind musicians. So, Scott, now we are at the place where I have this question for all my guests, and you do not have any option to say no.
Okay, I guess I'll say yes then.
So, Scott, if you have all the superpowers in your hand to change something in your country, UK, what that would be?
Ooh. Oh wow. I would. Okay. What would I do? I'm torn between two answers. Do I want much stronger legislation around accessibility being a thing that happens by default, or do I want to say in 12 months from now, we are going to completely relaunch an overhauled welfare system and everything else goes on hold that needs to go on hold to make that happen? Um, so, wow, this is a boring answer because apparently my superpower is just I become a
No, no,
politician.
no. Please go ahead.
um, yeah, I'm going to do the welfare one, man. I'm going to do the welfare one. The benefit system in this country is a mess at the moment. Not in that, like, I appreciate there are a lot of countries in the world where there isn't any government support, and obviously that's worse, obviously. But the situation in this country is that, like, if you need to go on any sort of government support, it can be very mentally damaging to be on that support. Like, the system is not designed in a way that supports you, that encourages you to succeed. And so, yeah, I call it the benefits trap, where it's like, I mean, being on that support is like almost a part-time job in itself, and like a really demeaning, unmotivating amount of stuff that you have to do. So I'd change that. I would change that. I think, you know, what teaching over the last few years especially has shown me is that you can make a huge amount of difference to someone's life
Yes.
going on the amount of support you give them to get started with something new, to learn, to better themselves, to explore a direction, to change career, to whatever it is. It's really important to have like that support there at ground zero when someone's making a big change. And I think there's a much, 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 much better job that this government and subsequent governments in this country could be doing to facilitate that. So as boring as it is, that would be my superpower. Like, I would be able to mandate that to happen and no one would be able to say no and stop it.
It was awesome, wonderful, great talking to you, Scott, and I really enjoyed throughout the show. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for giving me this great opportunity to host you on Suman versus Human.
pleasure, man. Anytime.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Do subscribe or follow on your favorite platform.